The smell of roasted turkey filled the air, blending with the sweetness of pumpkin pie and the faint spice of cinnamon as our family gathered for Thanksgiving. The dining room glowed warmly with candles, laughter bounced from wall to wall, and for a moment, everything seemed perfect, almost like the holidays you see in movies. My mother was bustling back and forth with serving spoons, my cousins were sneaking pieces of bread when they thought no one was watching, and my father, as always, sat tall and proud at the head of the table, the kind of man who commanded attention without even speaking. To the outside world, we must have looked like the picture of family unity, smiling faces, clinking glasses, stories being told over steaming plates of food. And yet, beneath that warmth, I carried a quiet tension, a familiar ache I could never quite explain. My relationship with my father had always been complicated. He was a man of ambition, discipline, and unshakable pride, the kind of father who raised us to believe loyalty to the family, and especially to the family business, was everything. I had sacrificed more nights than I could count to keep that business running, working long hours, putting aside my own dreams just so he could see the company thrive. And even though he rarely said it out loud, I believed deep down that he noticed, that he valued my efforts. I believed one day it would all mean something. As the meal went on, I tried to push away those thoughts. I let myself enjoy the familiar rhythm of forks scraping plates, the teasing between siblings, and the warmth of being surrounded by the people I had known all my life. It felt safe. It felt like home. I remember catching my father's eye at one point. He raised his glass in a small toast, and I smiled back, not realizing how fleeting that comfort was. Because what I didn't know then was that before the night was over, before the pies were even cut, my world would tilt on its axis. My father, the man who had built our family's legacy and taught us to treat it as sacred, was about to make an announcement that would crush me in ways I never saw coming. I could never have imagined that around this very dinner table, the same table where I had celebrated birthdays, graduations, and countless holidays, he would look at me with cold eyes and strip me not just of a business, but of my place, my value, and my worth in this family. And that night, the Thanksgiving feast I had once cherished would become the memory that haunted me forever. Our family business wasn't just a company, it was the very backbone of our lives, the invisible thread that tied us all together. My grandparents had started it decades ago, back when they had nothing but grit, determination, and a dream. They poured their entire lives into it, building it brick by brick, customer by customer, until it became more than just a way to make money. It became a legacy, a symbol of who we were as a family. My father inherited it in his 20s, and with my mother's support, he expanded it, turning what was once a small operation into something respected across the community. Growing up, I was told the story of the business more times than I could count. How my grandfather had mortgaged his house to keep it alive, how my grandmother had balanced the books by candlelight when electricity was cut off, how every generation carried the weight of responsibility forward. And from the time I could understand words, it was made clear to me, one day, it would be my turn to shoulder that responsibility. My siblings never seemed interested. They wanted freedom, adventure, lives beyond the constant grind. But me? I stayed. I stayed late after school to help stock shelves. I learned the ins and outs of accounting before I was old enough to drive. I listened carefully at the dinner table when my father talked about suppliers, contracts, or customer relations, because I knew those conversations weren't just idle talk, they were lessons for me, a roadmap for the future I was expected to inherit. That I gave up things I didn't even let myself mourn. I turned down opportunities to study out of state because my father said the business needed me close. I said no to trips with friends because I couldn't risk leaving during busy seasons. I even ended relationships because, in my father's words, no one comes before the family's work. And I believed him, wholeheartedly. I thought my sacrifices were noble, that one day my loyalty would be recognized, my love for the family and the legacy honored. The long hours, the aching hands, the missed milestones, they would all add up to something, wouldn't they? I told myself that when the time came, my father would look at me and see not just his daughter, but the person who had carried the torch when no one else would. I thought he would be proud, that he would say I had earned my place. Even when relatives mocked me for being the workhorse of the family, even when cousins whispered that I was wasting my life in the shadow of my father, I brushed it all aside because I thought I knew the truth. I thought I was building something unshakable, something that would always be mine, because I had given everything to it. But looking back now, I realize I was blind. I had confused loyalty with obligation, love with sacrifice, and the very people I thought I was protecting were quietly preparing to show me that, in their eyes, my devotion meant nothing at all. Thanksgiving that year should have been perfect, at least on the surface. The dining room was glowing with soft light from the chandelier, the tables stretched out longer than usual, covered in a white cloth my mother only brought out for holidays, and every inch of it was filled with food, golden turkey, mashed potatoes drowning in butter, bowls of cranberry sauce, baskets of warm bread rolls, even the pecan pie cooling on the sideboard. My siblings and cousins filled the room with noise and laughter, clinking glasses, trading inside jokes, passing plates back and forth. For a moment, I let myself believe we were an ordinary family, one where love outweighed rivalry and tradition meant security. I sat between my cousins, watching Lily, my little niece, giggle as she tried to sneak an extra piece of cornbread, and I thought, this is what we work so hard for, this feeling of togetherness. My father sat at the head of the table, of course, the position he always claimed without question, his presence commanding in a way that made everyone else instinctively fall into line. He was in a rare good mood, laughing at Garrett's silly stories, nodding approvingly when Megan boasted about her latest social media followers. It almost felt like pride, and for a fleeting second, I thought maybe, just maybe, tonight he would acknowledge me too. When the meal slowed down and conversation quieted, my father tapped his knife against his glass, the clear ting, ting, ting cutting through the chatter like a warning bell. Instantly, the laughter stopped. Even Megan lowered her phone. "I have an announcement," he said, his voice smooth and commanding, the way it always was when he was about to reveal something important. My heart jumped, but not out of fear, out of hope. I straightened in my chair, my palm suddenly clammy against the napkin in my lap. He paused, scanning the room with a look that made it feel like we were all on trial, then let a small smile curve across his lips. "As you know," he began, "this business has been my life's work. I built it from the ground up with the lessons my father left me. And now it's time for the next chapter." My chest swelled with anticipation, because in that moment, I was sure I knew what was coming. He was going to announce a new expansion, maybe a new partnership, and more than that, I thought he might finally declare what I had spent years earning, that I would be the one to carry this legacy forward. My mind was already racing with possibilities, with pride, with relief that all my sacrifices would finally be seen for what they were. Around me, forks rested on plates, conversations hushed, all eyes on him. The suspense in the room was electric, and I could almost taste the sweetness of validation on my tongue. But as I watched my father take a deep breath and prepare to drop his words onto the table like stones into still water, I had no idea that everything I believed about loyalty, sacrifice, and family was about to be ripped out from under me in the cruelest way possible. First, the air in the dining room was warm with the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon pie, but in the blink of an eye it turned heavy, suffocating, when my father set his glass down and said the words that would burn into me. "Forever, we're selling the family business, and you're getting nothing." My mind refused to process it, like the words were in another language, and yet their meaning cut straight into my chest. My fork slipped from my hand, clattering against porcelain in the stunned silence that followed. For a breathless moment, I looked around the table for some sign that this was one of his dry jokes, that someone would laugh and diffuse the tension, but no one did. Instead, I saw Garrett smirk into his wine glass like he had been waiting for this moment all along. Megan's eyes went wide, her perfectly manicured fingers frozen mid-scroll over her phone, and then almost immediately she switched into performance mode, pressing record on her live stream as tears welled in her eyes. "Daddy, no! What about the Addams legacy? My brand is built on being an Addams," she gasped theatrically, and I wanted to scream at her that this wasn't about her social media following. This was about our lives, our sacrifices, our entire family history. But I couldn't find my voice. It was Mom who finally whispered, "What are you saying?" And Dad raised a hand, commanding silence like a judge about to deliver a sentence. "I've been negotiating for months," he said, calm, detached, almost proud. "Tomorrow it will be finalized. $50 million. More than fair given the market challenges. But none of it is going to you as inheritance." The words were knives, each syllable cutting deeper, and suddenly Garrett slammed his fist on the table, rattling the silverware. "That's our birthright," he shouted, his face flushed with fury. Megan let out a wail that was more for her camera than for us, tears streaking her face, but her phone still angled to capture her raw pain. Through it all, I sat perfectly still, numb, the world muffled like I was underwater. My hands trembled around the linen napkin, my chest tight, and still I could not speak. "Where is the money going?" Megan demanded between sobs. Dad's expression didn't waver. "Your mother and I will use some for retirement. The rest will establish the Addams Foundation to support technology education." He said it as if it were noble, as if destroying our futures, invalidating every late night, every missed party, every holiday we spent working at the company could be spun into a generous act of philanthropy. Garrett leapt to his feet, knocking over his wine glass, the red liquid bleeding across the tablecloth like spilled blood. 10 years I gave this company. 10 years, and you promised it would be mine," he roared. Megan chimed in, clutching at her chest like a tragic actress, crying harder as if her life had been ruined in front of her followers. My father's face hardened. "I promised nothing. I built this company from my father's dream. I decide its fate." And still I said nothing. Inside, though, the storm raged. I thought of the nights I had stayed at the office until sunrise, the times I had missed birthdays, vacations, relationships, because I believed in his vision. I thought of every belittling comment, every dismissal of my ideas, and yet how I still stayed because this business was supposed to be my place in the world, my proof of worth, my inheritance of love as much as money. And now, around the table where we were supposed to share gratitude, he stripped me of not just a future, but of belonging. My throat tightened until I could barely breathe. Garrett shouted again. Megan cried louder. Mom pleaded with Dad to reconsider, and still he stood there unmoved, sipping his wine like a king watching his court crumble. It was then, in that suffocating silence between the chaos, that I finally understood. This was not just about money. This was about power, about control, about his final statement that we would never be his equals. And as I forced myself to inhale, steadying the shaking in my hands, I knew this moment would define everything that came next. I had thought Thanksgiving would be about family, but instead it became the day I realized that blood does not guarantee loyalty, and that sometimes the people who should protect you are the very ones who destroy you. The room buzzed with the echoes of my father's announcement, but when my voice finally returned, it came out raw and trembling, sharper than I intended. "How could you do this to me?" All eyes shifted, and for once Megan lowered her phone, sensing the storm in my tone. I leaned forward, clutching the edge of the table, my knuckles white. "Do you even remember the years I gave to this company? The nights I slept on the office floor because deadlines had to be met? The friends I lost because I chose the family business over a social life? The promotions I turned down elsewhere because you told me this?" My voice cracked, but I pushed through. This was my future. My father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Garrett snorted under his breath. "Oh, here we go! The martyr speech!" he muttered, and Megan giggled through her tears, a sound so cruel it cut deeper than any insult. "Stop making this about you," she snapped, regaining her theatrical flair. "Dad made a decision. Respect it." My chest burned as I turned to her. Respect it? He just erased everything I worked for. Do you even know how many times I covered for you when you were too busy live streaming to show up at the office? Her face hardened, lips pursed, but she didn't deny it. My father finally raised his voice, a sharp command. "Enough!" He glared at me as if I were the one ruining Thanksgiving, not the man who had just dismantled our legacy. "This is not the time for selfishness. We are moving forward, and you will accept it." My mother's eyes darted nervously between us, but she said nothing, not a single word in my defense, and that silence echoed louder than any argument. I felt the tears threatening, but I refused to let them fall in front of them. "Selfishness," I repeated, my voice breaking with disbelief. "I gave you everything. My 20s, my energy, my loyalty, and all I asked for was the chance to be seen, to be valued. And this is how you repay me, by telling me I'm nothing at your dinner table, like I'm a stranger in my own family." My father didn't flinch, didn't soften. "You need to grow up," he said coldly. "This was never yours to claim." Something inside me fractured then, a deep crack that couldn't be repaired. Garrett smirked again, raising his glass in mock sympathy, while Megan muttered to her followers about toxic vibes ruining the holiday. Even my mother's hand, which brushed against mine under the table, felt more like a gesture of pity than support, and it stung worse than outright betrayal. "Don't ruin the holiday," Garrett sneered. "We're supposed to be thankful." Thankful. The word curdled in my stomach. Thankful for what? For being dismissed, erased, humiliated? My voice rose despite my attempts to steady it. "I'm not just losing a business here. Don't you get it? I'm losing the respect of my own family. I am sitting at this table realizing that none of you value me beyond what I can do for you." Silence followed, heavy and suffocating, but none of them reached for me, none of them contradicted my words. My father simply stared, resolute, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum instead of his daughter bleeding from the inside. That was the moment the truth crystallized. I had not only lost the business I had poured my soul into, I had lost the family I thought I was sacrificing for all along that I couldn't stay at that table a second longer. The walls felt like they were closing in, the laughter of my siblings like knives digging into my back, my father's cold stare suffocating me. Without another word, I pushed back my chair, the screech of wood against tile silencing the clatter of silverware, and I stood up. My legs trembled, but my voice didn't when I said, "Enjoy your holiday. I'm done." Gasps rippled, but no one stopped me, not even my mother, whose hand faltered in midair as if she had thought about reaching for me but changed her mind. I walked out, my heels striking the hardwood floor like drumbeats announcing war, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out Megan's whispered commentary to her live stream. Outside, the cold November air slapped my face, and only then did the tears spill over, hot and unstoppable, as I stumbled toward my car. Sitting in the driver's seat, I broke into sobs, not just for the betrayal of that night, but for years of sacrifices, the birthdays missed for deadlines, the exhaustion I wore like armor, all for a family who now told me I was worth nothing. But as the sobs quieted into shaky breaths, something sharper began to form inside me, a resolve I didn't know I had. If they thought they could erase me, they were wrong. That night, I stayed awake until dawn, replaying every word, every sneer, every silence. By morning, I was done grieving. I was planning. The first thing I did was call a lawyer, my voice still hoarse from crying but firm with determination. I laid out everything. The promises, the sacrifices, the years of sweat equity poured into a business they now wanted to strip me of. "You may not be able to stop the sale," the lawyer said, "but you can protect yourself, and you can build again on your terms." And that was when the spark caught fire. If my father believed I couldn't succeed without him, I would prove him wrong. I began sketching the blueprint for my own company, fueled not by his approval anymore, but by the hunger to create something he could never take away. In the following days, my father called me twice, his tone shifting from cold authority to guilt-laced manipulation. "You're making a mistake walking away like this," he said. "Family is family. You'll regret burning bridges." I almost laughed at the irony, bridges he had set on fire long before I struck my first match. "No," I told him calmly. "The only regret I'd have is letting you keep treating me like I don't matter." His silence on the other end was heavier than any insult, but for the first time in years it didn't crush me. It freed me. I blocked Megan's endless texts filled with fake sympathy and thinly veiled requests for money. I ignored Garrett's drunken voicemails about how he should have inherited everything. And when Mom finally sent me a message saying, "Please don't tear this family apart," I deleted it without replying because I finally understood it wasn't me who tore us apart. They had chosen money, control, and appearances over love and respect. I had simply chosen myself. Standing in my small apartment a week later, surrounded by notes, business plans, and the faint smell of burnt coffee, I realized that what I was building wasn't just a company, it was a life. One where my worth wasn't defined by my father's legacy, but by my own resilience. And though the betrayal still ached, though the wounds were fresh and raw, I knew I had made the only decision that could lead me forward. To cut ties with toxicity, to reclaim my power, and to rise from the ashes of that Thanksgiving dinner stronger than they could ever imagine. I end the weeks that followed, I poured myself into rebuilding. Not just my future, but my sense of self. At first, the silence after cutting off my family was deafening, like a void where their voices used to dictate my every move. But soon that silence became a kind of freedom, a wide-open space where I could finally hear my own thoughts. I threw myself into my work, channeling the pain of betrayal into drive, and brick by brick I began shaping something entirely mine. I started small, leasing a modest office, hiring 2 people who believed in me when I could barely believe in myself, and from there the vision grew. Every late night and every risk I took felt like a step away from my father's shadow, proof that I wasn't the helpless girl he painted me to be. And as the weeks turned into months, something shifted. Opportunities opened, clients believed in my talent, and slowly I realized I was no longer chasing their validation. My worth wasn't in the business they sold out from under me. It was in the resilience I discovered when they left me with nothing. Along the way, I leaned on the people who had always been there quietly in the background, friends who sat with me during my darkest nights, a partner who reminded me daily that my heart was bigger than any empire, mentors who encouraged me to take risks and trust my vision. They didn't care about my last name or inheritance, they cared about me. And that was when I understood. Family isn't defined by blood, but by those who stand beside you when the world tries to break you. For the first time, I felt peace seep into my bones, not because everything was perfect, but because I had stopped fighting for the love of people who never intended to give it. Looking back, I realized my father's betrayal had been a twisted gift. It forced me to break free from the illusion that I needed his approval to matter. I didn't need his business, his money, or even his acknowledgement. What I needed was already inside me, the courage to believe I was enough, the strength to walk away, and the will to build a future shaped by love, respect, and authenticity. And as I watched my new life take shape, a thriving business, real relationships, and a heart no longer chained to old wounds, I knew that in losing their respect, I had finally gained my own. Sometimes, the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who share your last name, the ones you thought would always have your back. I learned the hard way that blood isn't always thicker than water, and that sometimes the family you're born into will take from you, belittle you, and strip away the very things you worked your whole life to protect. But here's the truth I want you to take from my story. Betrayal doesn't have to define your future. When my father announced I was getting nothing, I thought my entire world was collapsing. But what I didn't see in that moment was that I was being pushed out of a cage I never realized I was trapped in. Yes, I lost the business I gave my heart to, but I found something far more powerful, the strength to create a future that no one could take away from me. And now I see clearly, your worth doesn't come from inheritance, approval, or anyone else's recognition. Your worth comes from your own resilience, your ability to stand tall when others try to break you, and your decision to walk away from toxic ties that no longer serve you. So let me ask you directly, if you were in my shoes, sitting at that dinner table and hearing your father say you were getting nothing, what would you do? Would you fight tooth and nail to reclaim what was rightfully yours, or would you walk away, close the door, and build something greater on your own? I want to hear your thoughts, because stories like this aren't just mine. They belong to so many of us who have been betrayed by the very people we thought we could trust. So please, share your experience in the comments below, because you never know who might need to hear that they're not alone. And if my story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell, because more real stories are coming your way. At the end of the day, remember, family isn't always who you're born to. It's who chooses to stand beside you through loyalty, respect, and love. And that is something worth more than any inheritance could ever buy.